Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. On today's show, I'm joined by a special guest, Nick Hutchinson. Nick is a business owner, personal development enthusiast, and author of Rise of the Reader, Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn. He's the visionary force behind BookThinkers, a company dedicated to bridging the gap between authors and readers. Nick also hosts the popular book podcast, BookThinkers, Life-Changing Books, where he chats with the authors of his favorite self-help and business publications. As a speaker and coach, he's helped thousands of people achieve their personal and professional goals through the power of positive reading. Nick has dedicated his life to helping millions of readers take action on the information they learn and rise to their potential through his books, speaking, and personal brand as a whole. This was the inspiration for his new book, which we'll discuss today. Nick, welcome to the show.
Marc, I'm excited to be here. Can I ask you the first question today?
Go for it.
I know you're a huge proponent of reading, and we just wrapped up 2023. So I'm curious, what was the best book that you read last year?
So I probably read over 20 in that self-help business, and even like in my field in finance as well. I think my favorite one was one we read as a team in my company called Die with Zero.
Oh, I love it, man. Bill Perkins is a friend of mine.
Yep, and it kind of throws like financial planning, on its head. The traditional thinking about it is to really kind of how living your best life and enjoying like every moment of your life, and obviously your money comes with it as well. So that probably one I think resonated the most with me, and I think that's one that I took the most out of for the year.
Yeah, Die with Zero is such a great book.
Yeah.
I read that a couple of years ago. In fact, my company did a 100 book giveaway where we gave away 100 copies of Die with Zero a couple of years ago. So
oh wow.
I'm definitely really familiar with that one. I just read a book. I'm curious if you've read it. Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth by Nick Murray.
Yeah, it's actually one. So when we start working with someone in financial planning, we give them this kind of welcome package. And that's one of the books that of our rotation. Let's say we have like maybe 5 to 7 different books that we give out depending upon where someone is in their financial life. Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth, Nick Murray, we give that one out. Just because that's another one, like a lot of people, I think, overcomplicate what they have to do with their finances or what they should be doing. And, we love the message of it that finances don't have to be complicated. It's a great book as well. So yeah, I have read that one.
Yeah, well, Die with Zero is a great one. Thank you for indulging my curiosity there for a minute.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about how much I like reading. I try to read at least 20 books a year, and I've been doing that for as long as I can remember. And I mentioned we started a book club up with my company. There's 4 of us, and what we do is we rotate. So it's probably every month, every other month that we'll pick a book, and we rotate. Each person on the team picks the book for that edition. We all read it, and then we record a podcast episode on it and kind of discuss it and just what we take out of it. And there's a couple that we come up that we didn't like, but at least gives us that ability to talk about them. So I'm a really staunch reader. How did you, I guess, get into kind of this niche or focusing on reading?
Well, what might surprise you, since you can see my background with 1,000 books behind me, is that I wasn't much of a reader growing up. So I was more of the athlete stereotype, not really much of the academic. You couldn't pay me to read a book when I was growing up, right? I wasn't the best student. And that sort of behavior and attitude carried with me through most of my college experience as well. So I went to business school, and heading into my senior year of college, I took an internship at a local software company. It was a sales internship. And my boss at the time, Kyle, I think he saw some unfulfilled potential in me. That'd be a nice way of saying it. This young, kind of cocky, know-it-all, 20-year-old sales guy. And he saw that I was commuting about an hour each way, 5 days a week. And he actually recommended podcasts. So shows just like this, where a host would interview a series of guests, and the guests would talk about what they've done to become successful. And so I started listening to podcasts to and from my internship every day that summer. And very quickly I realized that so many of the people being interviewed, they were giving at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading or had read, and maybe a book that they had written. And so I just realized, like, if I was deliberately choosing not to read the books that made these people successful, then I was also choosing to live under my potential, because the roadmap was available for $20 in a few hours of my time, and I was choosing not to read the books. So I think probably by like the 10th time I heard Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or Think and Grow Rich, or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I realized that there must be some magic sauce in this world of personal development or business books. And so that's why I decided to start reading. And I haven't looked back ever since. I mean, just like you, I read a lot of books every single year, and I try to make sure, well, now I do it full time, but I try to make sure it's a huge portion of my week every single week.
I was, obviously reading a lot of paper books. Then it kind of over time switched to reading them on the Kindle. And now I listen to all my books. I find that I have to, I'll listen to it, but with like a notebook, like either an Evernote notebook or like Google Keep open just to take notes. Otherwise, I can get distracted and kind of lose focus of what I'm reading. But what's your most common method of consuming these books?
I'm still a physical paper book guy. I haven't read much on the Kindle. I mean, I read a couple of books a year on a Kindle if I'm traveling internationally and I can't get access to a physical paper copy. And I probably listen to 20 books a year, so I still do listen to a bunch. But there's an interesting stat that I came across, which is that 80% of the inputs to our brain are visual. 80. So by default, if you're only listening to information, you're sort of at a disadvantage. It's harder to retain and implement or take action on or take notes on information if you're only listening to it. Now, I love that you listen with a notebook by your side. Most people don't. Most people listen while they're in their car or at the gym or doing chores, and that's multitasking. So not only are you at a disadvantage because you're only listening to information, but you're also not focused on it. You're focused on the road or the weights in front of you or, cleaning the counters or whatever the case is. So I try to read physical paper books, but I think that any form of a book is positive. And like I said, I still listen to a lot of books as well.
Now, I know everyone you talk to about reading and the people that don't read, a lot of times their excuse is, I don't have time. But in your book, Rise of the Reader, you kind of break it down to a math equation, which you say 15 minutes of reading, you can get through about 10 pages. 10 pages in the morning plus 10 pages in the evening is 20 pages a day. 20 pages a day times 5 weekdays, 100 pages a week. 100 pages a week, 52 weeks a year, 5,200 pages per year. You divide that by a 250-page book and you get to that 20 books. What other tips or suggestions do you have for someone that says, I just don't have the time?
Well, when somebody tells me I don't have the time, I love to say, if I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And that same person that just told me they didn't have time, they're like, well, I could read 5. So it's never a question of whether or not we have time. It's a question of whether or not we value reading enough to prioritize it over other things in our schedule. And so once we kind of get to that agreement of okay, yeah, you're right. Maybe I'm not viewing the books as valuable as the $10,000. I get that. Then I think it shifts into a question of, why are you reading? Are you reading to solve problems, build skills? Are you emotionally connected to the content that you're reading? Because if you read with more intention, then I think it becomes easier to pick up the books, because the books are solving problems. They're removing pain. They're building skills. They're exciting. Another thing that this one, it always blows people's mind. It's so simple. But when are you trying to read? Are you trying to read at the end of a long day where your willpower is drained, you're burned out, you just put the kids down, and now you're trying to get to the book and you can barely keep your eyes open? That's never going to be a successful reading session. So instead, maybe shift your reading, whether it's the 20 minutes or whatever the case is. Try to shift your reading to a time in the day when you have more energy. For me, I love reading right after my morning walk with the dog and right after my morning gym session, right when I start drinking coffee, because I have the exercise endorphins flowing and the caffeine just hit my brain and I'm ready to go. It would be impossible to fall asleep. So think about when you're scheduling the reading into your day. I think that's another equation or another variable that sometimes people aren't really thinking about.
Yeah, it makes sense. How do you pick what book to read? Do you kind of just through your environment, things come up and you're like, okay, that would be a good book to read and I'll put that on my list and whenever I get to it? Or do you like strategically kind of go after certain types of books that maybe, like you mentioned, you're trying to build a skill or solve a problem?
Yeah, I strategically look for specific types of books. And in a past life, like working in a company, I would do the same thing with our company book club. So everybody would get together, let's just say, Mark, through the lens of your next read and say, hey, what problems is the business currently struggling with? Or what problems are we as a group struggling with? And then you go out there and you find a book to solve those problems. I heard a recent math equation that kind of puts this into perspective recently. I think it was Jordan Peterson. He said that if you're dealing with a problem on a daily basis in your business and your personal life, it doesn't matter. Just a problem that you're dealing with on a daily basis. Over the next 30 years, so 30 times 365, you're going to deal with that problem 11,000 times. Or you could read a book about how somebody overcame that same problem. You could read the book, you could implement it, and you could go without the pain, right? So that's how I think about it, is like, what problems is my business experiencing? What problem am I experiencing in my health, my wealth, my relationships? Or on the other end of the spectrum, what skill sets am I lacking? Like, what's the difference between where I am today and where I know I could be in a few years? And what skills are missing? What do I need to go out there and learn more about in order to be more capable and achieve more in my job or in my personal life? And then go out there and look for the best books on those subjects. There are a lot of places to go for book recommendations. You can go to social media, you can ask mentors, you can go right to Google, or you could go to Amazon. Love or hate Amazon, Amazon has the most data on books as far as reviews are concerned. And so when you type in on Amazon books about business communication, books are going to pop up and you can filter by the books that have the most reviews. Typically, it's very hard to sell a book consistently for a long period of time. I mean, I work in book marketing and I know how much of a challenge that is. Oftentimes with a big enough audience, you can make a little splash. But to sell a book consistently over time means that it has to provide a lot of value. So filter by reviews. And then when you jump into the reviews, just a quick recommendation for everybody, I say toss out the 5-star reviews and toss out the 1 and 2-star reviews, because those are typically written from a place of emotion, either positive or negative. They might know the author and they might love them or hate them. But if you get to the 3 and 4-star reviews, that's where reviews are typically written from a place of logic. You'll see things like, this was my expectation or the problem I was looking to solve, this is what was delivered, and this is what was missing. You'll see a lot of reviews written like that. And so I think you can get a really good understanding of what a book might deliver and maybe what some of the downsides are before you jump in just by going to Amazon.
I guess one of the problems that I've struggled with in the past with reading is, I'd almost read a book just to get through it and to read it and to check it off that, okay, I read another book. How formal are you with actually implementing the knowledge that you learned in it? Are you like going into, when you start the book saying, okay, I'm going to try and look for 5 things I can take and actually build that in? Or are you kind of just reading and knowing that, okay, if I read this, I will acquire the knowledge to solve whatever problem or to gain whatever skill I'm trying to gain?
It's a great question, and thank you for the transparency of admitting that it's something that you struggle with, because just like you, I mean, for years and years and years, I was reading to hit a certain number, just to check a certain number of boxes. And that would influence my reading in a negative way sometimes. I would pick shorter books. I would breeze through a book or skim through it just to kind of check the box, or turn the Audible to 2x speed and listen to it on a long car ride and do nothing. So eventually I realized that my goal isn't to read a certain number of books, because by itself, although there are some benefits to reading a certain number of books, it is sort of a vanity metric. Like, it doesn't mean anything objectively. And so a couple of years ago, I shifted my goal. Instead of reading a certain number of books a year, I just wanted to take at least one action from every book that I read. And that could be one book for the whole year, although I'll tell you, it gets addicting once you start taking action. So like, I read 100 books a year right now on average. But let's talk about Die with Zero as an example for how I would set a goal. Instead of just opening the book and reading chapters and hoping that it's going to change my life, what I'll do is I'll set a SMART goal before I jump in. And so SMART is an acronym that's used in goal setting all the time. It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, meaning you're emotionally connected to it, and time bound. You give yourself a deadline to take action. And so I would set a goal like find and implement at least one strategy for living more of an experiential life by the end of February. So that's specific. I know what the goal is. It's measurable. Did I implement at least one strategy for being more experiential with my life? It's attainable. I didn't say like make $1 million by the end of February. Just find and implement one action or strategy. Am I emotionally connected to it? Like, heck yes. I know that we only have a certain amount of time left on this planet, and I want to make the most out of it. I want to go live my life. I want it to be experiential. I want to die with zero and time bound by the end of February. So I give myself a deadline to take action. I leverage Parkinson's law, which states that a task will expand to kind of fit the timeline that you give it for execution. And then I'll write that intention on the inside cover of the book or in my notes section on my phone or in Evernote, like you said, or Google Keep. And I'll review it every single time I read another chapter so that I'm sharing my goal with the book so that the book can share just the most important information for me to take action on back with me. Like our brains have this reticular activating system, the RAS, which is our brain's natural filtering system. And so if you tell the book essentially, or you tell your brain, I'm just looking to implement one strategy to be more experiential, everything else will melt away, and that one thing will just jump off the page to you. And you might find 3 or 4 or 5 things that you want to implement. And then I would say just do a quick 80-20 analysis and say, which 20% of these activities are going to lead to 80% of the change I'm looking for? And just choose to implement 1 or 2, maybe 3 things from the book. And that's how I've kind of shifted my reading. And I'll just tell you real quick, the first time I ever read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, I had over 100 notes that I put into my Evernote document for the book. And it's like, that's not realistic behavior. Just reviewing the information became a chore. But implementing one thing from a book, that's pretty reasonable. And it's more than most people do.
Maybe we can dive a little bit into the note taking that you do for books. You know, you mentioned Think and Grow Rich, where you took a ton of notes. How is it modified over time, and what are you currently doing, like as you're going through a book with taking notes?
So today I go through a book twice. The first pass through, I read or listen to every word on every page, or every word in the entire book. We'll talk about a physical paper book in this example. Now, every time I see something that's related to my intention, right, an action that I might be able to implement, or maybe like a home run quote or something like that, I'll quickly circle the page number and kind of bracket off the section of the book that I think is interesting that might help me fulfill my goal. Maybe I'll highlight it, but I'll continue reading. I don't want to lose the momentum. I don't want to multitask. I think that reading and note-taking / implementation / reflection / journaling, they're 2 different activities, and you don't want to jump back and forth between both. So again, I'll go through the entire book with just my intention in mind and really trying to limit the things that I highlight to those actions that I can implement. The second pass through the book, I'm only rereading and rewriting the things that I've highlighted or bracketed off. So the first pass through is 100% of the book. The second pass through is like 1 or 2% of the book. And the reason that I do this is not every action is created equal. Sometimes I'll hear people say like, oh, I read the first chapter, I got it, I implemented it, I'm done. And I'm like, you don't know if what was in the second chapter would have been 10 times more efficient and 10 times more impactful. So I think it's important to read the entire book, collect all of the potential actions that you could implement, rewrite them in your notebook, on a physical paper notebook or in your online Evernote notebook, and then choose which one of those actions that you'd like to take action on. That's how I do it today. Like I said, I used to just take notes on everything that I found interesting, and it was a long, arduous process. And most of the time, I never memorized those quotes. I never looked up those extra resources, and I didn't take action on anything. Now I really just try to simplify it to what am I going to use in my life. And there's a great metaphor that I heard somebody say recently. They said, imagine if you were carrying bowling balls. You could put one in one arm, one in the next arm. Maybe you could balance a third on top so you could hold 3. But if somebody handed you a 4th, it's not like you just drop just the additional bowling ball. You would drop all 4. And so the same thing happens when we try to collect too much from these books. If you try to implement too much, you end up implementing nothing. You end up procrastinating. It's not reasonable action. And so you don't retain or implement anything. That's why I think simplifying just down to a few actions is probably the most important thing that we can do.
Kind of reminds me of one of my favorite books, but I read it a while ago, called The One Thing.
Yeah, I love that one.
Where he boils it down to what's the one thing that can make the most impact, whether it's in your life or your business or whatever you're trying to do. But that's sort of similar to what you're trying to do is, right? You start with this big book, hundreds of pages, and kind of your first pass through, you're going to whittle it down a little bit. But then as you go through it again, you're going to kind of get, all right, these are the core things that I want to try and implement or try and actually execute from it.
Yeah, I think the opening line to The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan is something, it's a Russian proverb, I think, and it says, if you chase 2 rabbits, you'll catch none, or something like that. And yeah, that's the concept, is like these books, I mean, you can reread a book a dozen times and implement something different every single time you read it. I just think like small, manageable steps in the right direction. I mean, as a financial advisor or wealth management person, like you understand the compound effect. It's that monthly installment, no matter what, that makes the difference over a long period of time. And I think the same thing happens with these books. It's like, it's the one action you implement from the 20 books you read every single year that ends up compounding over time. And like you could read a dozen books on investing, but if you don't invest it, nothing happens. You could read books on health or fitness or diet or whatever you want, but if you don't implement them, nothing happens. Behavior change is what I optimize for instead of just a number of books now.
Another challenge I have is starting a book and not finishing it. And there's probably a couple different reasons. I think one, maybe like a new book idea, or I come across a new book and it's that shiny new object and I say, oh, wow, this looks great. I want to start this one. Or I may just get bored by the book that I'm reading. Do you ever start a book and then not finish it? Or is it once you commit to it, you're going to finish it? And then if that's the case, what tips or what ideas do you have for someone who will start a book and not finish it?
When I first started reading personal development books, I thought in order to check the box, I would have to read every word of every page. And I don't know where that came from. I really don't, because there are no rules to reading and implementing books, right? But then I heard 2 of my favorite authors, Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss, on a podcast one time. And Ryan said, life is too short to read bad books. And he gave a rule. He said, the rule of 100. You take the number 100 and you subtract your age. That's how many pages of a book you have to read before you can determine whether or not you're going to continue. And so for me, I'm 30, so I'd have to read 70 pages of a book before I'm wise enough to know whether or not it's going to solve my problem. If it's not going to solve my problem, or it's a bad book, or I don't vibe with the author, like I'll put it down. And I don't need to pick it back up. The older you get, the less you have to read because the wiser you have become, like as the rule states. Unfinished books represent problems that you no longer need to solve. They represent things that didn't resonate with you. Like they still have value and they still have meaning. But I would say, yeah, don't finish a book if another problem pops up and you need to solve it and you find a better book for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What are some of the other key strategies you found effective for, as someone who's trying to master their reading habits or even trying to get into their reading habits?
Well, I think accountability is a really important variable, and that's something that it seems like you have in your company book club. So reading by yourself is difficult. Taking action by yourself is difficult. But there's the old gym partner analogy. Like if you wake up at 7 and you go to slap your alarm clock and snooze it, but there's somebody that's waiting at the gym for you, right? Like you're more likely to get out of bed and go take action and get to the gym. And I think that the same thing happens with the books that we're reading. If you do have a monthly call where everybody sits down and they talk about their favorite takeaways from the book and what they're going to implement, I think that's a really important variable for taking more action. One of my favorite Napoleon Hill quotes says, action is the real measure of intelligence. And so if you can hold your friends accountable to taking more action on the books they're reading, then you can fly. You can read and implement more and more and more over time. In the second half of Rise of the Reader, I give everybody access to my activity tracker. So the legendary management guru, Peter Drucker, he says, what's not being measured can't be managed. And so I have an activity tracking template that everybody can get access to. and you can make your own copy. And it just teaches you how I plug the actions that I'm going to implement from the books that I'm reading into this tracker. I set a goal to take action on it throughout the week. I measure whether or not I took action and what the results were. And there's a whole bunch of other functions like streaks and stuff like that. So if you kind of merge the two, like you have an activity tracker and you have an accountability group that has visibility to it. And when you meet, I can say, hey, Mark, you have a goal to read for 60 minutes a week, and like you haven't hit it in 4 weeks, man. What's the deal? Like, can I help you? Can I hold you more accountable? Do you want text reminders? Do you need to modify your goal? I think that those kind of two things married together have been very powerful for me.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to one of the things you mentioned earlier about scheduling it. And if you do that, you're more apt to probably stick with it rather than if you kind of say, well, okay, I want to read today. And just inevitable, something's going to come up. And if reading is one of the things that gets pushed to the side, there's going to be more days than not where it gets pushed to the side. And then it just becomes easier and easier to push it to the side every day.
Yeah, I think so too. Like you mentioned, scheduling the reading time, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening, or even just one of those two every single day is that small step in the right direction that we're looking to compound. And what's great about reading is that it pays dividends over time, just like the memory dividends that Bill Perkins talks about in Die with Zero. It's like in Die with Zero, he says, hey, if you have an experience and you document it and you relive it through storytelling or rewatching the content on your phone, like you can feel that joy from a past event again in the future. It pays dividends over time, and it will grow and compound as the experience of telling the stories and stuff compounds. And I think the same thing happens with these books. It's like every time I talk about them, the experience grows. And I know that repetition leads to retention. And so when I talk about these books and when I teach them and when I explore these subjects on a call like this with you, Mark, it's like it takes on a life of its own. It grows into something new. And so anyway, I love the power of these personal development books. I think that they hold so much potential. I really think there's a book to solve almost every problem that we can ever conceptualize. Somebody's figured it out and they've documented it for us and we can read it.
Yeah.
Which is so cool.
Sure. In the conclusion of Rise of the Reader, you talk about delayed gratification. How does delayed gratification apply to reading and the process of developing strong reading habits?
Well, it's no secret that in today's social media environment, things are available to us, and the instant gratification, the dopamine, like we're just sitting there all day long scrolling, and with Netflix, like these shows are literally engineered to steal our attention. And so that's a form of instant gratification. You literally get dopamine over and over and over and over again through variability and social engineering and all sorts of other tactics and stuff that they use. And so yeah, we get lulled to sleep. Like we fall victim to these platforms and they just suck all of our time and our attention away. And so I think that reading a book is becoming tougher and tougher and tougher. Like you even talked about, you used to read physical paper books and then it moved to Kindle and now it's audiobook. It's like, it's hard to sit down with a physical paper book these days and stay engaged with the material. Because again, there are so many other things that seem more gratifying to us in the short term. So I think when I think about serving my future self and delayed gratification, I think about what is Nick Hutchinson in 5 years going to be looking back and thanking me in the present moment for? Is it watching Netflix? Is it scrolling on social media? Or is it focusing on something that will provide dividends for the rest of my life, like reading a great book and implementing something from it? And I'm constantly trying to survey, like, what will Nick in the future look back and think Nick in the present moment for? And reading a book is a great example of that. But yeah, delaying gratification, it's really difficult to do. There's a popular Stanford marshmallow experiment that was conducted a little while ago where they had a group of kids in the room and they would give them a marshmallow or a pretzel stick and they would say, you can eat it or you can wait and you'll get another prize. And like most kids couldn't wait. They would just eat the pretzel stick or the marshmallow. But the ones that could wait, they would get another pretzel or another marshmallow if they could wait 15 minutes. And it's like they ended up tracking those kids through a number of variables like SAT scores and income and education levels and stuff. And like the ones that could wait, the kids that could delay gratification ended up experiencing a whole bunch more success throughout their lives. And I think, again, it goes back to delaying gratification, giving giving some satisfaction in the present moment up in order to be happier later on in life. Doing what others won't today so that you can do what others can't tomorrow. And that happens in investing, right? I mean, you've got to be frugal and you've got to stick to a budget like Nick Murray talks about, and you've just got to be a little bit robotic with it. And that takes hey, you could spend that money on a movie or a trip right now, or you could invest it, which is delaying gratification in a way, right?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Well, Nick, that concludes all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for being on the show. I found our discussion to be really great, interesting. How else can listeners find out more about you, get a copy of your book?
Great questions. Our most vibrant social media community is on Instagram at BookThinkers. That's the name of my marketing agency, BookThinkers. And over there, we've got 150,000 plus nonfiction readers. We put out content every day. There's a bunch of engagement. You could check out the podcast that I host as well. I've interviewed so many of these amazing authors, including Bill Perkins. It's called BookThinkers, Life-Changing Books. And the book is available everywhere that the books are sold. So Rise of the Reader by me, Nick Hutchinson. And I would love anybody's feedback if you have a chance to read it. I love hearing from people. So again, Mark, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Great. We'll include all those links in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Nick, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.